Support for the Brewlosophy podcast comes from the following. The best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world. Find everything from classics to modern favorites, as well as cool experimental varieties and a vast array of ingredients and gear at yakimavalleyhops.com. Love to Brew is a national leader in homebrewing supplies, offering exclusive products such as East Coast yeast, TV taps, and Brewlosophy recipe kits, all with free shipping on orders over $75. When you need brewing ingredients or equipment, check out Love to Brew at love2brew.com. Welcome back to the Brewlosophy podcast. We have got a fun show lined up for you today. We are coming back a little bit sooner than promised, which is pretty cool. And the reason we're doing that is because we've been getting a lot of encouragement and a lot of support from you listeners out there, and we couldn't appreciate it more. Thank you so much. Today, the topic we're going to be talking about is something known as no Sparge Brewing, which it's pretty cool. No Sparge Brewing is a full volume mash method that allows people to basically do a single mash, collect their sweet wort, move on to the boil without sparging or rinsing their grains. It's pretty neat. It's really convenient, and it's one way a lot of brewers use to cut out some time in their brew day. Joining me today to talk about No Sparge Brewing is one of the contributors to Brewlosophy who has actually done some experimenting with this method, Jake Huolihan over in Denver, Colorado. How you doing, Jake?
Doing great, Marshall. Thanks for having me on today.
This is kind of a novel thing for us, right? We're so used to pecking away at a keyboard, and now we're using our voices to share this weird information.
I know. It's pretty crazy, too. I mean, I've been listening to podcasts for as long as I can remember, too, and to finally be putting something out there that's on par, I think, with some of the stuff I've consumed over the years, I think it's pretty cool.
You know, your voice just sounds so silky and smooth through that microphone, so nice work, Jake.
Yeah, compliments of you.
Yeah, I've been recording for a while, music though, and so far the people that I've sent stuff to has just been all of my old recording equipment, and it seems to be working out fairly well. Like I mentioned, Jake is over in Denver, Colorado, and not to keep talking about weather, but he was telling me that during his brew day just yesterday, and I should say today's April 2nd, so on April 1st, it started snowing. I mean, I was outside collecting data with some friends, and I think it was 75 degrees. It's just crazy to me how the weather's been so interesting lately.
Yeah, it had been so nice here, too, the past week, and then it gets to Saturday, and out there brewing, and it just starts snowing on me. Crazy Denver spring weather.
I honestly don't know how people deal with it. I'm a sun boy. I like me some sunshine. So, well, hey, I just got back from a really awesome place. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of New Zealand, but I also bounced over to Sydney, Australia with my wife, and we met up with some great friends, Paul Nicodem, and some he introduced us to some of his homebrewing friends. I drank a ton of Aussie beer and Kiwi beer and had a great time hanging out with people who live so far away. And we're talking a 15-hour flight to get to Sydney, and had the time of my life. And I just wanted to give props to the guys who organized the New Zealand Homebrewers Conference. This was the second year that they ran it. And I'm telling you, man, if you can make it down to New Zealand at some point, you've got to do it. It's a blast. Again, the people were just as cool as the beer was. I did a keynote talk, a really sappy keynote talk on, what it is that keeps me in homebrewing. And I believe somebody I think the best compliment I got was on Twitter. A gal who was attending said something like, the talk that I gave was really cute. I don't know if that's something I should be proud of or not, but
I think you should be very proud of that.
Of my cute talking skills, I guess. So New Zealand, it was amazing. We had a great time. Thank you so much to Mike and to Carl and to Ed, the guys who organized the whole thing, and to everybody out there for showing us an amazing time. It was really a lot of fun. Speaking of conferences, we have got HomebrewCon coming up here in June, and I am so excited to be going, and I'm so stoked that you, Jake, and some of the other contributors are going to be there, pouncing around, doing our dorky stuff in a more public setting. Will this be your first time going, Jake?
Yeah, this is my first conference. I'm pretty excited about it. Couldn't be in a better city. Minneapolis is great. I've been there a lot, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. For your first time, I think you'll understand why people go back to these things over and over and over again. You know, it's easy to look at a conference like this and think, well, you know, it's all about the beer, but that is so not what it's all about. You'll make friends that you talk to. You know, well, first off, I think one of the coolest things is you bump into these people who you know of online, and you get to meet the real versions of them. And there's something so cool about coming together with such a large group of people who love the same thing and you know, hanging out for a whole weekend, just doing all kinds of fun stuff. If you haven't registered for HomebrewCon, you can do that over at the American Homebrewers Association website. We will be there. We will be hanging out with whoever wants to hang out with us. It's going to be a blast, and we're really looking forward to it. I believe Greg is actually also thinking about going to the Southern California Homebrew Fest. That's something that we've been talking with the organizers of to see if we can't maybe get some exBEERimenting done there. So we're going to be bouncing around a lot this year. Some feedback. We got a really good response to the very first episode. Again, thank you so much for everyone for listening and for downloading, and then for giving us all of the encouragement. This is something that is going to take a little bit of time for us to get used to, and I feel like we're getting into a groove, and knowing that you guys appreciate what we're doing actually does matter. And so thank you so much for, again, patting us on the back, giving us your encouraging words. It's making doing this thing all the more fun and exciting. And I couldn't be more stoked to bring you guys these episodes more often. The comments that came after we dropped the first episode were similar to the ones that came after the episode 0, after our little teaser. People really do want different types of content. And as long as we kind of stay, it seemed like the common theme was they want us to stay on this kind of experimental, kind of sciencey side of things, which I absolutely love. For those of you who read an article that we published on the last week of March, we did put out a survey asking for the people to vote on the types of content. We have some ideas that we've been throwing around for future shows, and we got a great response, over 1,000 responses, and it's looking like we're going to be able to come out with some really interesting content soon, and we'll be sure to announce all that before we do it and let you guys know what is up with that. Again, thank you so much for the feedback. Please keep sending it our way. Let us know what you'd like us to do differently. Let us know what you enjoy about the show, and we will do everything we can to kind of mold this thing to fit what it is that you all want to listen to. The reason we're able to pump these shows out is because of the support that you guys are giving us, as I just mentioned. And there are a few very easy ways that you can support us. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Go to brewlosophy.com/support. You'll see the entire list of things that you can do to help throw some support our way. We really do appreciate it. I do want to focus a little bit right now on patreon.com. I'm really excited about this thing because it allows us as content creators to do some neat things for the people who are able to set up recurring contributions to us on a monthly basis. For example, I know all of you are dying to get your hands on a Brutility belt. It's just one of those things that demands interest. The people who are supporting us through Patreon had first crack at getting Brutility belts. In fact, when we announced the Brutility belt going live on the website, the people from Patreon who wanted one already had them wrapped around their waists. And not only that, they got a discount as well. So go support us on Patreon, patreon.com/brewlosophy. You are going to get first crack at all the new merch that we come out with. You're going to get all kinds of special offers and deals and stuff like that just for supporting us. It's as little as $1 a month, and you're going to get those kinds of cool opportunities. Thank you so much for the support you've already given us. Of course, the easiest way you can support us is to listen to this stuff and to read the content that we push out over at brewlosophy.com. Continue doing that. We will be forever grateful, and we will do everything we can to continue bringing you this kind of content. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to delve into No Sparge Brewing, also known as full volume mashing, and get real dorky about it. Stay with us. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste time chilling wort, which is why I use cleverly designed immersion chillers from Jaded Brewing. After some bad experiences with counterflow and plate chillers, I began the search for a more efficient chilling solution and discovered Jaded. That was nearly 4 years ago, and to this day, I continue to rely on the King Cobra and the Hydra to chill my wort in record time without the setup or cleaning hassle of other chillers. If you're looking for a way to optimize your brew day, I can't recommend Jaded chillers enough. Go see what they have to offer at jadedbrewing.com and let them know Brewlosophy sent you. All right, welcome back to the show. Time to talk about no Sparge Brewing, also known as full volume mashing, with Jake. This is a really, in my opinion, it's one of those kind of methods that when I first learned about it, it kind of blew my mind, and it didn't seem to make any sense to me because I cut my chops in the world of fly sparging. I actually avoided fly sparging because it seemed so complicated, and then I read an article that I believe Denny Kahn wrote on a cheap and easy method for batch Sparge brewing. And that was all I did. And I had done it for so long that I was just convinced it was the best way. It wasn't until, 5 years ago or so that I heard about no Sparge brewing, and I was doubtful that it would, be a really good method, but I've started doing it a lot lately, and there are a lot of reasons. Jake, what exactly is no Sparge brewing? Is there some kind of background information you can give about what it is and maybe what it requires?
So no Sparge brewing is kind of one of those instances where the name says it all. So oftentimes when people are lautering, they'll have a step called a sparge to really rinse the sugars or excess sugars from their grains and to get to that volume that they want to boil. In no sparging, you mash with the entire volume of hot liquor and just run it off. There's no rinsing step. It basically cuts off what's between 10 and 30 minutes of sparging.
So I guess that's part of where some of the controversy, at least initially, came from, was that there's something of value in the sparging process.
Right. I think so. And I think that's the way that I approached no Sparge brewing when I first learned about it. I mean, you're dumping all the hot liquor in there. There's no step to rinse off those excess sugars. I guess I went into it with a preconceived notion that my efficiencies would be down at 50%, and that no Sparge just wouldn't be worth it.
Yeah, I know one of the common arguments against no Sparge, or I guess it's not against it, but is that it does typically lead to a hit in efficiency, which is interesting because of late, I think over I don't know exactly when brew in a bag was invented, but that was kind of traditionally conceived of as a no Sparge brewing method or a full volume mashing method. And there are people nowadays that I know of who brag about their brew in a bag batches hitting 80% plus efficiency. So it seems kind of questionable, this idea that it will necessarily lead to lower efficiency, I guess.
I totally agree. I don't really experience a huge efficiency hit when I do no Sparge brewing.
There are different methods for no Sparge brewing. And I know the first time I ever did a no Sparge batch, it wasn't brew in a bag. I actually did a no Sparge in my regular old, converted cooler mash tun. But it seems like, again, brew in a bag has kind of taken the no Sparge thing and made it its own, though I still know people who batch Sparge and fly Sparge even with kind of brew in a bag setups. What is it that's required? There's one thing in particular that's required for people who want to brew no Sparge. And you and I talked about this a little bit before. That is volume, right? They need space.
Right. Exactly. So no sparging, you're putting the entire volume that you eventually want in your boil kettle, less grain absorption, less mash tun losses. You're putting that entire volume in your mash tun, so you're going to need a little bit bigger of a mash tun.
I know there are ways that people can determine the amount or the volume that they actually require for their grains and the water combined, so as not to overfill their mash tun. Are there specific calculators and stuff out there that exist that might be able to help people to do that?
I think there are a couple out there. I know I use BEERsmith, and I think that does a pretty good job of telling you what you need and what's going to be required to do that no Sparge brewing.
Yeah, I know the kind of workaround that I came up with in BEERsmith was to basically what I'll do is I use my standard batch Sparge setup, the equipment profile and the mash profile, and then I'll just go in and adjust the Sparge volume to 0. So I just add the Sparge volume to my mash volume, and that has always worked perfectly. BEERsmith actually will adjust your strike temperature and everything to adjust for that greater volume, the greater, I guess, liquor to grist ratio. And so that's what works for me. I know there are other calculators out there. I've heard of one. I'm missing the name. I think it's Green Bay Rackers or something like that. But there's a bunch of calculators. You can Google, no sparge volume calculator and get that. A lot of them will be kind of brew in a bag based, because like I said, I think that's kind of that's the kind of notable no sparge method.
Right, exactly. And when we talk about no sparge brewing, I mean, we're kind of combining two topics here. So brew in a bag and mash in a bag. I know you practice mash in a bag, where you have your mash lauter tun vessel that's separate from your boil kettle. You put a brew bag in there, put your grains in there, dump your water in there. And then other people like myself, you use one of those bags in their boil kettle and mash in the boil kettle. So I think we're basically doing the same thing, just two different ways to reach it.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. And like you said, we're kind of talking about a couple different things here, but just specifically on no sparge, there's really the only thing that would limit a person from doing no sparge, like we mentioned before, I think, is just the volume of their mashing vessel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because if you can't fit all of the stuff in there, you're going to have to figure out a way to get the rest of your volume, your water volume. And one thing that I've heard of some people doing as a no sparge method is it's sort of like what I view as kind of a hybrid, where they complete their typical mash, but then they like they would with a batch sparge, so a standard liquor to grist ratio. And I think the presumption there is that liquor to grist actually makes a difference, that there's some sort of an impact that ratio has. And then they take their sparge water at the very end, maybe the last 10 minutes of their mash step, and add all of that to the mash tun, mix it all up, and then run off their full volume. Whatever works, I guess, whatever works for you. I've never done it that way. In part because I can fit the entire volume in my mash tuns, so I just figure why not. And I'm one of those few who gets like 72% efficiency even when I'm no sparge brewing. So I've just stuck to that. I know there are some purported benefits to no sparge brewing, and if I recall, one of the more commonly cited benefits to brewing this way is that it can produce, again, purportedly, a more malt forward beer, or it can have some sort of an impact on the quality of the maltiness of the beer. That's
what I heard too when I was first looking into no sparge brewing. To me, it seemed like no sparge brewing, at least the way people were talking about it, was kind of adapted from the party guile system of brewing that was practiced over in England, where they would run off the first beer from their mash, make that a separate beer from their sparge beer. So supposedly that first beer was maltier, of higher quality, and really just a better beer. So when I switched to no sparge brewing, I'm not necessarily sure that it made that difference to me, but those are some of the reported reasons that people would want to do the no sparge brewing. Can you think of any other ones, Marshall?
When it comes to the kind of maltiness component of it, I can't make it make sense that by skipping the sparge, you're going to have some sort of a beneficial impact on the malt character. I mean, to me, you soak grain in water and you run off that sweet wort, and regardless of whether there's more or less water in there, it would be more of, I guess that what I'm thinking is seems like it would be more a function of the water volume, that diluting that kind of sweet wort. But so I, we could test it out by, I guess you could take some really, really high OG wort from a no sparge batch, and then and dilute it down to the OG after a sparge, and then see it with just, water, and see if those taste the same or something. The only thing that does make some sense to me about this whole, argument that no sparge produces a maltier beer, is that because you are skipping a sparge step, and this would be particularly true for fly sparge brewers, I suppose there's a lower risk of tannin extraction due to oversparging. Like when people, the pH gets so high in the mash that you start to extract these tannins from the grain husks. So that makes sense to me, and maybe the lack of those tannins led to the impression of more malty beer for people who first started doing no sparge and maybe jumped over from fly sparge. If that even makes any sense.
I think that makes some sense. I've never really practiced fly sparging, but I do know that people maybe won't adjust the pH for their sparge water and run off and raise the pH in that grain bed, and maybe extract some things that you're not extracting when you're doing a no sparge batch because you're adjusting the pH for that entire volume. That does make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I have absolutely witnessed the higher pH from an oversparged batch by measuring it with a pH meter. So I've seen that. I guess, who knows? It's all conjecture at this point, but it seems to make some sense on some level. And so who knows? As far as the maltiness being of higher quality, as a dedicated no sparge brewer these days, and we'll get into why I've decided to jump into that camp, besides my laziness, of course, I cannot say currently that the beers are any more higher quality malt character than they used to be. They taste, to me, they taste about the same. And again, I'm saying that not to bash No Sparge Brewing. I love No Sparge Brewing. I just don't know if that is a statement that we can say with any veracity in terms of actual like empirical evidence showing that it does produce a beer with a higher quality malt character.
I would totally agree. Having done No Sparge Brewing, I think coming up on a year exclusively now, I can't say that my beers are any different or any maltier than they were when I was doing batch sparging.
Right. That at least that couldn't be, for me at least, that couldn't be accounted for by the increased malt that I use to account for the efficiency loss, which, speaking of, like the cons of No Sparge Brewing, with the exception of efficiency loss, I've been racking my brain for other negatives to this method. I don't know if you have any, and we're trying to be honest here. What other downsides to No Sparge Brewing are there besides a small hit to efficiency?
I think for me, and this isn't really an issue for either of us because we're brewing in a house and a garage with a full setup. If you were a smaller batch brewer or maybe an apartment brewer that had smaller vessels or was doing a stovetop type thing, No Sparge Brewing just might be outside the volume capacity that you have. So I think that could be a con. Other than that, I really can't think of any.
Yeah, I was speaking of the efficiency hit, which is that's probably the biggest negative to this approach. I was talking with a nano brewer over in New Zealand. I believe he's brewing on a nano scale, which by the way, there are a lot of people over there doing that kind of thing, and their laws make it much more. People are much more able to get into brewing professionally that way. Anyways, I'll get off of that. But they were talking about how they, kind of like you mentioned with the party guile thing, that there's an approach that they use where they will collect the first runnings of their sweet wort, and that becomes something like an IPA, right? And then they'll collect the second runnings, and that becomes some sort of a summer beer. But what they'll do is take like 25% of that high OG, first running sweet wort. So that's a no sparge batch, if you want to call it that. And they mix it with about 75% of this lower OG second runnings batch. And then they create a third beer that way, which I believe is kind of an approach that Fuller's over in England takes with making their bitter and their ESB and whatever other third beer it is. Yeah, it's right. Yeah. And so they're kind of doing these two. I wouldn't call that second runnings a sparge because it's not that you are rinsing the grain, but you're not using it to make that single beer. You're kind of just taking the leftovers and then rerunning a quick mash with, well, I guess you're not mashing, but it's an interesting approach to me that I think could be used by a lot of people to make a variety of different beers from one mash, right? What if you throw in some crystal malt and some roasted malt or whatever it is after you collect those first runnings? Now you've got yourself a nice amber ale or something, from the same mash that you just collected that, double IPA wort from, something like that.
Yeah, or go from a Maibach to a Schwarzbier.
All kinds of options. I think it's just cool to be able to play around with this stuff. Well, I started the first no sparge batch I made was, I'm trying to think back, about 6 years ago that I think I looked up on YouTube, and somebody mentioning how the English people do these, what I just mentioned, they kind of do these party guile type beers. And I thought, it's worth giving it a shot. And I did my first batch, absolutely experienced a hit in efficiency. I think the first no sparge batch I brewed, I got something like 66% efficiency, which was about a 12% hit for me. At the time, I wasn't milling my own grain. So I was buying grain from my local homebrew shop but I brewed this beer and of course, when I brewed it, I told myself came out good. It was a little bit lower in alcohol than I expected, but the beer was all around tasty and just as good a quality as I'd made before. In my opinion, was more malty because that's what I had heard on this YouTube channel that it was supposed to be. And we started talking about this as a crew, as the Brewlosophy guys tend to do, about this impression of mine that does no sparge actually affect the flavor, the ultimate character of the beer that's made using that method. As you said, Jake, you felt like there wasn't a huge, or there hasn't been a really huge impact on your brewing, but we, as we're wont to do, decided that we would put it to the test, and we designed an experiment. You're the one who did this experiment. Do you mind kind of walking through a little bit of your thought process when it came to designing this experiment?
Yeah, I did. So, after switching over to no Sparge Brewing and not really noticing a difference, I really wanted to put it to the test and see if I could tell a difference, see if there was a more malty character in that no Sparge beer. So I went into this, I designed a pretty low gravity, light Kolsch, I think, so that wouldn't hide any flavors. And I just, I set up one batch to be brewed with a liquor-to-grist ratio of, I think, 1.5, as I was doing when I batch sparged, and then the other one going into Beersmith and doing that no sparge, setting that sparge water to 0 and infusing everything at once.
Yeah, I know. For one, I was very excited about this one. It's a variable that we spend a lot of time talking about, but as somebody who really enjoys the no sparge process, I will admit that I had some expectations. I'm not sure those expectations were that the beer would be maltier, but I definitely was looking forward to seeing these results. And that is what we're going to be talking about when we come back from this break. We're going to delve into the experiment that we did. We're going to talk a little bit about where we're at today, and then we're going to go over some reader feedback. Stay with us. We'll be right back. If, like me, you prefer the simpler side of brewing beer, you have got to check out the Brew Bag, a food-safe fabric filter that allows for mashing of the finest crushed grain without risking the dreaded stuck sparge. I've been recommending these things since I started using them. They are awesome. The Brew Bag offers the only completely reinforced fabric filter for brewing that can be used over 100 times and comes in sizes that fit most mash tuns, or you can even have one custom made. Go check the Brew Bag out at brewinabag.com and be sure to use promo code TBP17 to get 10% off your order of $30 or more. Welcome back to the show. It's time for us to talk about the exBEERiments. Woohoo! I believe we've only done one experiment focusing on no sparge, but we've actually written quite a bit about the process. For those who read the articles that we're putting out regularly, you've probably noticed that a lot of us do use the no sparge method, and in part it's because of the experiments that we've done on them. And I guess, something that I think would be interesting, we've talked a bit about our thoughts on no sparge brewing, but Jake, what was it that kind of inspired you to want to test this so much, and maybe some of your expectations about what the results might show?
So I guess I really wanted to test this just to kind of validate to myself that no sparge brewing wasn't really producing a different beer. I mean, everybody changes different methods, changes ingredients, and are convinced that they make a difference, kind of like what you were saying with your first no sparge batch being more malty. And I was pretty convinced that it didn't really make a difference. So I kind of wanted to validate my personal opinion in that.
So are you saying you disagreed with my opinion, Jake?
Never. So it's kind of like interesting. So you talked a little bit about how we chat about these variables before we tackle them. So no sparge brewing compared to batch sparge brewing, we definitely had some expectations, and I certainly had some expectations that the no sparge batch would definitely come in at a lower efficiency out of the mash. I didn't really have any expectations in terms of the maltiness. And then other than that, I didn't think there would be any observable difference in this beer other than the hit to efficiency.
Yeah, I recall when how long ago did you do this experiment? I don't have it up in front of me now, but
This was like a year ago, I think.
Yeah, about a year ago. And I remember when we were kind of mulling it over and talking about it, kind of thinking in my mind, well, what am I going to do if there is a difference? And how is that going to impact the way I brew for pleasure, So there were a lot of things going through my mind. I will admit that my expectations were more in line with the objective, measurable differences between the beers. So I was pretty fascinated to see actual side by side comparison of you compared it to batch sparge. And to see, what kind of real impact on efficiency no Sparge Brewing would have, because I had accepted that was the hit that I was taking, that was the negative, the big con to no Sparge Brewing was that, I'm spending more money per batch because I'm using more grain to make up for the efficiency hit. So, though my expectation was to see a measurable or a very real difference in OG, but I wasn't. I'd kind of come to the point where I wasn't so convinced, perhaps because of my experience with all of these experiments, that I wouldn't see a big difference, or we wouldn't see a big difference in the flavor of the beers and whatnot. So again, really excited to hit this one up. What was the experiment like? What was your brew day like? What exactly did you do?
So for this one, sometimes when we're designing a batch, we'll change specific variables to try to keep things as equal as possible. So for this one, we kind of just did the opposite of that. We kept the grist the exact same for each one. So each grist had, I believe, 10 pounds or whatever it came to of malt in it. And we wanted to observe that efficiency difference. So my brew day for this one went pretty well. Mashed in, staggered my start by about 20 minutes just to, save myself some sanity. I checked the pH on both mashes.
What was the liquor to grist ratio difference? Do you have that available? Because you ostensibly what we're doing is a batch sparge mash, so that liquor to grist ratio is going to be different. And there's some talk about how, and I guess this is one of those things that can be easily objectively measured, that the pH difference between the two, that the pH will be different between the two just because of those that ratio difference. Is that something that you observed? What exactly? Again, what were those liquor to grist ratio differences?
So with the batch sparge beer, I went with a 1.5 quarts per pound liquor to grist ratio for the initial mash. After 60 minutes, ran that off and then dumped in my sparge water as one would with batch sparging. I did adjust the acid content for each specific mash to make sure that they stayed at the same pH, because right. That's what somebody would do if they were if they were doing this. They're not going to brew a no sparge batch and put the same amount of acid in it as they would for a batch sparge and just accept the higher pH. So tried to keep those as equal as possible.
As someone who cares about their water quality, which there will be shows and shows on water chemistry and water quality in the future, I promise, that is definitely something that I have noted that I believe no Sparge Brewing requires more acid to adjust for the pH. Is that?
Yeah. For this one, I used phosphoric, and I think it was about 20 milliliters more for the no sparge batch. I mean, that's 10% strength. So in terms of lactic, it might just be, 4 or 5 milliliters.
Yeah. And that's, as I recall, I think the last batch I brewed, I used something like, for a no sparge batch, I used something like 7 milliliters of lactic acid to get my pH in the 5.2, 5.3 range, something like that.
Right. So yeah, I just, calculated the water differences, mashed them both in. Boiled each of them, and then came to the part where I was expecting to see some objective differences. So after the boil was done, chilled, racked into my fermentation vessels, and then measured the gravity. So the batch sparge beer came in at 1052, which calculated out to 74% efficiency, which was about what I was getting when I was batch sparging regularly, between 74 and 76. And then the no sparge beer came in at 1050, which calculated out to 71% efficiency, which is pretty much what I'm getting. And it sounds like that's about what you're getting too when you do no sparge brewing, right, Marshall?
Yeah, 71%. It sort of ranges. I just tightened down the gap on my mill, and I think I'm, even with 10-gallon no sparge batches nowadays, I'm hovering right around 73%. But I think it's worth repeating. Batch sparge 1052, you said, OG?
Yep.
and no Sparge did you say 1050 OG?
1050, yeah, so 2 points.
So a hit of 2 points, which as far I've yet to do a batch Sparge versus no Sparge brew day side by side, but I always believed the hit that I was getting was more than that. And I don't know where it came from, except for that I guess I expected the OG hit to be worse. And it's not like I was brewing two of the same beers. So it's pretty interesting that the difference was only 0.002 specific gravity points when you were brewing these two beers side by side. I don't know. I found that pretty astonishing.
I was pretty shocked by it, to be honest. I mean, I said that, that's about what I was regularly getting when I was doing no sparging at the time, but just to see it play out like that and to hit those numbers and have that be the only difference, I was kind of shocked and a little bit pleased by it.
Yeah. Oh, totally pleased, man. Because it validates the method that we prefer, right? That always feels good.
For sure.
Just to clarify, when you were designing these beers in Beersmith, did you leave your brew house efficiency setting to your tip, because you use the same recipe for both. So which one was closer to the setting that you had in Beersmith?
So it was the batch Sparge, because that was my standard at the time. So I'd set the beer to come in at 1052.
Awesome. So that is the first kind of objectively measurable observation, right? That there was a difference, and it was a measurable difference, but it wasn't as huge as maybe some people might have expected. When you were taking those hydrometer measurements, did you happen to notice any differences in, say, wort color or wort clarity? Was there anything there besides the specific gravity measurement that might have indicated the beers would come out tasting or smelling different than they,
I mean, I'd like to say that I tasted both hydrometer samples, and the no Sparge was just insanely maltier and so much more complex. Yeah. But I think they pretty much looked, smelled, and tasted the exact same.
So things are kind of moving in the direction of they're not that different yet, but who knows? Maybe there's something in the fermentation process that would produce some sort of a difference in the way people perceive these beers. So you ended up collecting some data using the triangle test method that we typically do, where tasters were served 2 samples of the same beer and 1 sample of a different beer. Do you mind telling us a little bit about how that went? And let's get into some of the dirty results here that we...
Yep. So these beers finished up fermenting. I kegged them up, fined with gelatin. The no Sparge cleared faster and more clear than the batch Sparge, which I found interesting. But we've done multiple tests and had that come back as insignificant, and it could be a function of the variable as well. So after about a week on tap, I brought these beers to one of my local clubs and served them to some people. So we got 26 tasters on this one. Given the sample size of 26, we would need 13 unique tasters to identify the odd beer out. And we actually...
I'm going to cut you off here for a sec, because I'm still... there's something to me about the difference in clarity that is very, very curious. Barring the introduction of some external variable that we were unaware of, at which I trust, it likely wasn't that, given how similar you treated these beers. Do you have any ideas of what could have contributed to the batch Sparge beer being slightly more hazy and maintaining that haze, it sounds like, than the no Sparge beer? That's something that stumps me, because I really can't, outside of maybe it possessing more tannin. I mean, what else could it be?
Yeah, I was kind of shocked by this one when I first, kegged these up. I've done batch Sparge beers before and had them drop, brilliantly clear just as fast as no Sparge beers. But I guess I think when I thought about it, and maybe what I posited was that during that sparging process, perhaps I didn't adjust the pH of the Sparge water. Perhaps, it extracted something different. Maybe that had an effect on the ending.
Yeah. I guess if it did have an effect, we would see that in the triangle test results. And, we're looking up to this point without knowing what the triangle test results are. There's a few things I'm kind of logging away in my mind. Well, that could have an impact, and maybe there is some sort of an effect from sparging or whatever else it might be that made this beer hazy. But I guess the one way to know whether it did actually affect the flavor, aroma, or mouthfeel of the beer is to put it through a triangle test, which you said you had 26 tasters?
I did. Yep. 26 tasters. And we would need 13 at a sample size of 26
to reach statistical significance.
Yep. To get a p-value of 0.05.
And how many actually selected the unique sample in the triangle test?
So we actually did, this was one of the experiments where we did achieve significance. We got 14 people able to correctly pick out the odd beer, which I believe in this instance was the no sparge beer. Of those 14 people that got it right, 7 preferred the batch sparge and 3 preferred the no sparge, and then a few having no difference.
It blew my mind when these results initially came in, because I was completely not expecting there to be a difference, a perceptible difference, despite the small little things that we were able to measure, which is kind of funny because what I was looking for obviously was validation. And when science kind of doesn't validate our beliefs, sometimes we kind of, for me, I had to kind of get over that and kind of ask myself, well, what is it that's really going on here? And why is it that I'm doing this? That's fascinating to me. So in essence, what these results show us is that, it's not totally conclusive, right? This is one experiment that was done with a very specific set of tasters at a homebrew club meeting, I believe you said.
Yep.
And they were indeed capable of reliably distinguishing the unique sample, which was the no sparge sample, from the beer that was made using the batch sparge method, which on some level means that we can say that perhaps no sparge brewing does make a difference as compared to batch sparge brewing.
Yeah, I was equally as shocked by these results as you, but I think it does lend some evidence that perhaps treating these worts differently like we did does make a noticeable difference on the beer.
Absolutely, and I think this is where. In the moments where we have these statistically significant findings, even if I think something we should hit on, you mentioned we needed 13 to reach significance and 14 were able to reliably 14 were able to distinguish the unique sample. That doesn't mean that it was barely significant. The way this type of a statistic works is that if you hit that lower, that number that bumps you into significance, it is what it is. That just means that we can say on some level that there is a meaningful result. So with that out of the way, we can move on to looking at the preference ratings, which for me have become, I think I've mentioned it before, that, on some level they feel meaningless because preference, at least in my opinion, is very subjective. What I don't like eating raw tomatoes, but if you throw some vinegar and cheese on it, I love it. Whereas my brother can eat a raw tomato like it's an apple. He loves them. That to me is a very subjective component when it comes to preference. And what we have been finding over and over again, and it's similar in this no sparge experiment that you ran, is that preference typically tends to be kind of mixed. Maybe not split down the middle, but we have never seen a 100% preference rating. We've gotten close, but we've never seen that. And in this case, you said 7 people preferred the batch sparge beer, while 4 people preferred the no sparge beer?
Actually 3, so about double.
So when you were giving yourself some triangles for this trial, how did you do? Do you recall? I know you wrote it down.
Yeah, I wrote it down. One of the reasons I was pretty shocked about this result is I could never actually distinguish these beers without just randomly guessing. I know we'll triangle test ourselves by pouring ourselves 4 samples and then just picking 3 random ones, so we don't even know the order. And I was never able to actually get this one correct without guessing. With
any consistency, at least, yeah.
Yeah, and without any confidence either.
It's so interesting to me, and I guess we should say that there's a possibility of getting a false positive result, what we call a type 1 error in this world, and that's always a possibility. It's why replication is so important. But it's you got 14 out of 26 people who were able to select the unique sample. It just feels, that seems like that's a lot of people, right? You would expect with...
I'm inclined to think that, these beers were different, and whether or not it was my bias of not wanting them to be different, that prevented me from picking out the different one.
Right.
But I'm inclined to think that they are. That's a pretty significant result.
Right. We spent, the whole beginning of talking about this topic, I'm kind of realizing now, talking about our expectations and what we expected to see and kind of what we hoped to see to validate our own beliefs and all of that. And go figure, bias works in two directions, right? It can help us to find those things that will confirm what we believe, but at the same time, it can serve to make us ignore certain things that may invalidate what it is that we believe. And perhaps that is what was at play in your triangles, or maybe you just couldn't taste the differences. I mean, it's really hard to tell. I'm fascinated by this to this day, though. And in particular, because despite these results and despite the fact that, only 3 people said they preferred the no sparge beer to the batch sparge beer, you still brew using the no sparge method. What's that all about?
So, I mean, I think we like to look at this data and interpret it as we recommend people do as it relates to you. And for me, even though the preference came back batch sparge as preferred, was significant, all that jazz, the time savings of no sparge brewing is just, it's too much for me. If my beer to some other people is not quite as good as it would be batch sparging, I'm fine with that for saving 30, 40 minutes in my brew day.
That is the main reason I do it as well. And I think, nowadays I don't brew for myself as well. I guess you could say it's for myself, but every batch that I make, I'm brewing a beer tomorrow. It's 2 batches side by side for an experiment. And when I do that, being able to skip that sparge step really does simplify the brew day. Now, I've heard arguments from people who really rely on batch sparge brewing. People that I respect a lot say that no sparge doesn't really reduce the brew day time at all and all of it. But I'm telling you, I've done both side by side, and I mean, not in the same brew day, but I've brewed both ways plenty of times. And no sparge brewing takes me about 20 to 30 minutes less time than batch sparge brewing for whatever reason. So that's the approach that I do as well. And I've stuck with it regardless of the results showing that they're not only different, but that 7 people preferred the batch sparge beer over the no sparge beer. I still love it. And I've used no sparge brewing to make beers, and I don't mean to toot any horns or anything, but I've done well in competition using the method. I'm not trying to sell it as the method anyone else should do, but it works for me, and I love it. So it sounds like you're kind of in the same boat, Jake.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't see ever really switching back. I mean, as long as you have the vessels that can take the volume and do a no sparge batch, it does save the time. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I guess there are ways. I mentioned before this kind of hybrid no sparge brewing where you do have separate volumes for your strike water or your mash water and your sparge volume, and you just add all of that sparge water at the end. You know what? That's gonna be the same amount of time it takes for a regular no sparge batch, and you're getting whatever benefits or whatever benefits you believe you're getting out of doing that lower liquor to grist ratio mash.
I'm pretty intrigued by that one now.
The liquor to grist thing.
Yeah, I hadn't really heard that as an argument related to this no sparge method, but I think that could be pretty interesting to do.
Yeah, there's 2 reasons that it came up in talking about no sparge today. One of them is that it was the one argument that a person that I was speaking to about no sparge brewing a couple years ago said for why batch sparge is better, or fly sparge or batch sparge, I suppose, is because liquor to grist matters. But the other one is when I started researching the topic for this show, I couldn't find anything else, any other negatives, with the exception of our research on this, the experiment that we did showing that less people preferred the no sparge batch. And I felt like we needed something, and it does kind of make sense. And we'll get into talking about our experimentation with liquor to grist ratio later. But if that variable matters, right? If liquor to grist does matter, then you've got a valid argument for why you might continue mashing with a less, not a full volume of brewing liquor.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question, Jake. If we're not big on telling people how they need to brew their beer, but let's say you're at a club meeting and somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, Jake, I saw that you did this experiment. I've been thinking about no Sparge Brewing. I've got all of the volume that I need to do it, but I'm just really scared that it's going to negatively impact my beer because, all of these people that you tested, that they preferred the batch Sparge batch better, but I'm looking for a way to ease up my brew day. Give me some advice. What is the advice you give that person?
So I think if somebody was asking me, for advice on a way to ease up their brew day, I think I would wholeheartedly recommend no Sparge Brewing. It takes out a step. It takes out a separate heating of strike water. If you're using gravity and lifting up that kettle to dump in that Sparge water, it gets rid of potentially a hazardous situation there.
Yeah.
And all in all, I mean, personally, I don't notice a ton of difference between no Sparge Brewing and batch Sparge Brewing. I know we have this result and they are different, but to me, the difference is small enough that if you're looking to save some time, if you're looking to, simplify your brew day, it's definitely something you should at least give a try to.
Yeah. If I were asked the same question, I think my advice would kind of go along the lines of, are you brewing your beer for you? Or are you brewing it for the tasters in our experiments? Sure. Seven of the people who got the triangle test correct may have said that they liked the batch Sparge beer better. But who's to say that with some tweaks, the no Sparge batch wouldn't have been up to par, wouldn't have been equally as preferred, just because of a result in one of our experiments. And we say this all the time, it doesn't make it truth necessarily. And it could have been that with a different set of tasters, maybe they would have gotten the triangle test results the same, similar level of significance, but who knows about preference? Again, you don't rely on the palates of others to determine the type of brewing you're going to do. So when we published these results, we got quite a few comments from some people. I figured maybe we could spend some time responding to those. Do you have anything that you've...
So I think one that kind of stuck out to me a lot, just because it's also an experiment I've done, is that batch sparging causes a lot more hot side aeration, or at least the potential to cause a lot more hot side aeration.
Okay.
I think that went into a pretty long discussion on the Reddits when we posted this one, but I guess the premise of the commenter was that, you're dumping in this volume of batch Sparge liquor, you're stirring up that wort, you're introducing oxygen, and what you're going to do is, decrease the shelf stability, decrease the flavor due to that hot side aeration.
Yeah, I know a lot of the questions that I recall seeing that stemmed from the publication of this experiment had mostly to do with measuring the water volumes and getting all of that stuff correct in whatever brewing calculator it is that people are using. And just to reiterate, the easiest way that I've found to do it is, well, there's kind of two, and I go over this. We have an article on no Sparge Brewing and setting up your whole BEERsmith, equipment and mash profiles for it. And the way that I use, because I still do occasionally batch Sparge, is I just use all of my same batch Sparge settings. And then I go in there into the mash tab, or now I forget what it's called now, brew day or something like that. I go into there. I open up if you double click that first mash step, you can go in and actually change the mash volume, the volume of it. And what I'll do is just add whatever it's recommending my Sparge volume be to that mash volume. It zeroes out the Sparge volume and it adjusts your strike temp for that. It's super easy. That's the way I've done it. The other way is to use a brew in a bag equipment profile, and then you'll have to go in and actually change your settings in BEERsmith. Again, we go over this in the video on that article. You can just search brewlosophy.com for no Sparge BEERsmith and you'll find it. If you are a brew in a bag brewer, that's the way to go. It's super easy, and you're not going to, it's all set up for you. If you do occasionally fly Sparge or batch Sparge, I would recommend just doing the method that I use. It's really easy. Let's see. I guess some other questions were kind of based around, I'm kind of going through some of the questions I see there. Tannins, polyphenols, all that kind of stuff. Nobody that I'm aware of notes tannins in the beers that I make using the no Sparge method. I know that's anecdotal. I don't know if you talked with any of the participants in your experiment, Jake.
I did. It's so hard when you do these tastings because the people don't know what the beer is. They don't know what the variable is. So they're really just grasping at straws for what it is. I don't remember, coming across anything meaningful in terms of what I thought the variable differences might be.
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately what we've come to is no Sparge brewing is a completely valid approach that can save some time. Perhaps for some people it doesn't, but it works really well, such that you and I know some of the other contributors continue to use the method. It's easy, it works, and it doesn't seem to have a huge negative impact, if any negative impact at all, on the quality of the beer, despite some of the preference ratings that we got from the tasters in your experiment. Does that sound about right?
I think that's how I would sum it up for myself.
Awesome. Well, hey, I'm going to go brew a couple of no Sparge batches tomorrow. And, thanks again, man. This was a lot of fun. We're going to continue kind of moving along with this whole podcast thing. And hopefully all you listeners out there enjoyed hearing us talk about no Sparge brewing. If you have any suggestions, if you want to talk about this, go ahead and comment on the article that is linked with this podcast. You can also, of course, all of the social media places where we post this stuff too. We love conversing with everyone out there about all of this. If you've had experiences maybe brewing with no Sparge or brewing with fly Sparge even, and maybe having higher perceived tannin and astringency from that, we'd love to hear from you. And it's I think it's a cool method, and I really like kind of digging into these mash methods because of the tradition that kind of goes into where, how we basically convert those starches in grain into the wort that we end up fermenting. Thank you to everyone out there who is listening to this and supporting us. We really do appreciate it. We're going to be back again in a couple of weeks with the next episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Please, if you haven't already, go subscribe so that you know every time an episode comes out and you can eat it up immediately. If you really enjoy this, please consider supporting us. You can go to brewlosophy.com/support, use our Amazon links, use our More Beer links, use all of our links. You can also go check out patreon.com/brewlosophy to read about the neat rewards you get for supporting us on a monthly basis. We look forward to being back with you soon. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me.
Looking for a new career? Welcome to Do HVAC Training Service Center in North Charleston. Enroll today in our comprehensive HVAC training hands-on field experience-based program, covering troubleshooting, maintenance, installation, and more on various HVAC systems and ductwork. We offer EPA and NAEP preparation and testing, along with various certifications. Enjoy payment options. Achieve certification in under 5 months. Enroll now for your new journey of skill development and career advancement. Log on to dewhvactrainingsc.com to inquire.